Welcome to Authenticity, which is all about shaping high-performance workplace culture. My name is Simon Tyson, and in my role as CEO of the Real Learning Experience, I've been working with organisations for nearly 30 years, helping them create exceptional workplaces. As a leader, you know the daily effort needed to create a culture that produces great results and in which team members and customers are happy. Those things do not happen by accident. The journey isn't always easy. And that's why this podcast exists. Make sure you subscribe as we share our experiences and strategies to help you transform the workplace culture you have into the workplace culture you want.
Hi listeners, just a quick editing note before we kick off episode 2. Around the 21-minute mark, our guest interview has a slight decrease in the sound quality for around 8 minutes. We can assure you this doesn't happen in future episodes. However, we made the decision to include it because we felt the content was valuable even with the less than desirable sound quality. Hi, I'm Kira Lee, and welcome back to Authenticity, where we discuss shaping your high-performance workplace culture. Today in episode 2, we're going to talk about what does a great culture look like for organisations. Episode 1, you will remember we looked at what culture is and how it works. Today, we will chat about the range of outcomes that an authentic organisation drives to achieve through its culture. As we go, we will ask you to think and reflect on your organisation. How are you going against these outcomes? Are they all prioritised? Or do some get more attention than others? And if this is the case, what impact is that having now, or might it have in the future? Simon, I might ask you to jump on in here and do a quick recap on last episode for our listeners.
Of course, Kira Lee, and I am excited to be back and excited about all the amazing feedback we had after our first episode. So in that episode, in episode 1, we talked about authenticity, which in our definition is all about aligning the things we do, say, think and decide with the culture we say we want to have. Anything else is inauthentic. If we're saying we want one thing, but allowing the business to act and do things that are not consistent with that, that's just not authentic. And my challenge to those businesses is we either need to get real and change what we do, or we need to change our expectations. Of course, we hate to see a business compromise. And when I say compromise on the ideal culture. So often compromising is easier because shaping culture is challenging. So what organisations often do is they back away from the culture they say they want to have, even if they're not consciously doing that. They back away by choosing not to deal with things that are not consistent. So if you do what you want to become consistently enough, change occurs. That's where we're really at.
Absolutely agree. So what we know in what we do is that alignment is critical. And when we work with our clients, we talk about the outcomes the organisation should be prioritising. So just to be clear, authenticity also requires that we prioritise a range of outcomes. So what we find is when organisations get too singular in their definition of outcomes, people or results, often both can suffer. Is that something that you agree with?
Absolutely. And look, a really singular focus on bottom line results can be achieved at the expense of integrity, at the expense of authenticity. It can be achieved at the expense of people, both inside and outside the organisation. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be striving for exceptional results, by the way. But if that's the singular focus, then it opens up all sorts of behaviours in the pursuit of that singular focus that may not be favourable long term or even short term for many of the people around.
So whilst there's nothing wrong with organisations that go hard at bottom line effectiveness, the issue comes about when one is prioritised at the expense of others. And some of the examples of this that our listeners will will know and understand are the financial institutions, and in particular the Australian cricket team. Now, Simon is a very passionate cricket lover, so I might ask you to chat.
Cut me to the heart.
I might ask you to chat a little bit on this aspect.
Yeah, you're cutting me to the heart here. That's and just I'm going to take a step back for a moment. So when we talk about the critical outcomes that an organisation should be trying to achieve, we look at three particular sets of outcomes. So we absolutely should be trying to achieve exceptional results, measured on whatever metric is important for the organisation. So in the case of an organisation like the cricket team, like the Australian cricket team, then winning is a fairly important metric for them. In the case of a lot of businesses, profitability is an important metric. In the case of not-for-profits, in the case of community organisations, in the case of government organisations, obviously the bottom line metrics become a little more complicated. And it's possible for an organisation to have many bottom line metrics, but that's only one category. The other two metrics that are critical are delivering great outcomes for customers and users, whatever you call them in your business, and creating an exceptional workplace. Because if we do all three, then exceptional results become sustainable. So going back to the example that you flagged, the Australian cricket team, and it cuts deep for me because I'm a passionate cricket lover and have been all my life. The Australian cricket team a few years ago was the whole sandpaper incident. And for those of you listening outside of Australia in non-cricket playing nations, the Australian cricket team cheated. There's no nice way to put it. They cheated in the pursuit of winning, and they cheated by tampering with the ball used in the game. And that came about because they were in a really tough situation in a match, that their normal above board practices were not achieving the outcome. Winning was so important that they gave up integrity in the pursuit of winning. And it's that's tragic because it impacts obviously the cricket team, but it impacts every cricket lover. For me, and maybe this is controversial, maybe I'm wrong, I don't believe for a second that was an isolated case. I don't believe something like that is likely to happen in isolation, that someone will execute a behaviour like that is blatant and extreme cheating in a culture that doesn't accept some grey areas in the first place. So for me, the culture probably facilitated that, and what we saw was the pointy end of it. But you also raised the financial institutions was a major issue in Australia a few years ago. Selling insurance to dead people, selling life insurance to dead people. Again, that didn't happen in isolation. That was a product of a culture that prioritised bottom line results. Nothing wrong with results, but don't do them at the expense of the other two, which are the internal and external stakeholders.
And then, of course, we've got the flip side of this is when you have an organisation that will prioritise looking after their people and then in turn forget about that bottom line effectiveness. And we see this happen when there's an organisation that's a really lovely place to work, but it's an organisation that doesn't hold people accountable to achieving results, or an organisation that accepts mediocrity for poor performance or behaviour and doesn't have the framework to call people out or hold them accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about the framework, and it's also the confidence and the custom. So it's not the done thing to call people out. So what we see very often is what we would call a culture of harmony, which gets in the way of a culture of accountability. So what's prioritised in an organisation is making nice, is keeping everything smooth, is keeping everything happy. But the consequence of that is that issues aren't dealt with. people aren't held to account. I'm a believer in developing people. I'm a believer that we're in the growth and development business. So our focus is on growing people and giving them the chance to be the best version of themselves they can be. I'm also a realist that some people won't make that choice. And when people don't make that choice, we need to be prepared to hold them accountable. And that takes leaders somewhere they don't like to go, and it's uncomfortable. But when we shy away from that discomfort, we choose harmony over accountability. And what we're really doing is prioritising the outcomes for people over results, and that doesn't work either.
Absolutely agree. The alignment of the things we do with the culture we want to have is critical, and closing that gap between the two is one of the greatest challenges that organisations face when they look at their culture.
Absolutely. It's one thing to know. Now, ironically, and this is something we'll come back to in a future episode, often organisations aren't as clear as we think they are on the culture they want to create. They're clear on the one that they've got and they don't want to have anymore, but they're not as clear on what they're trying to create. So that's a whole topic of its own. But it is a great challenge to close that gap because it means changing habits. If you've had a culture of prioritising results over people, then it's hard to change that because there's still pressure for the same results. If you've had a culture of harmony over accountability, then changing that feels really confronting. One of the things we do know is that organisations have a choice between conflict and tension, and they're guaranteed to have one or the other. Now, when we have a culture that is not accountable, when it focuses on harmony, then what we're doing is not dealing with issues. We're not having conversations. And as a result, there's a bunch of undercurrents. And that's what we call tension. And if you go into that organisation and say, does everyone get on? They go, oh, yeah, we get on really, really well. But what they really mean is there's a really smooth surface. But underneath, there's all these underlying issues. Now, for me, I'd much prefer an organisation that embraces conflict because at least conflict is honest. Conflict is above the surface. And once it's above the surface, we can deal with it. The reality of closing the gap between the culture you've got and the one that you want means that we have to deal with some issues, and that's going to involve some conflict. So the responsibility for leaders is to deal with that conflict effectively, but not to shy away from it, because in doing so, we create tension.
So just on that, the responsibility of leaders in that balancing, I think now's a good time to bring in our next guest. Do you agree?
It's always a great time to bring in our next guest. It's someone I've known for a long time and someone that I've worked with for many years, and I'm really looking forward to hearing his wisdom.
Our next guest brings with him a wealth of experience and knowledge on what a great culture looks like. So it was on this basis that we made the decision when we edited this episode to shorten our Q&A so that our listeners can get the benefit of the full interview.
Fantastic. Let's bring it on. So our guest today was a very deliberate choice based on the topic of the episode. Rick Lenarcic is the COO at Grant Broadcasters, a 100% family-owned regional broadcaster. They started with a station in Dubbo nearly 80 years ago, and now they've got 52 commercial stations. More importantly, I've been privileged to observe Rick's journey for nearly 30 years. We met when Rick was a long-haired, skinny junior sales rep in an office on the northwest coast of Tasmania, a media rep. And I've been alongside him, sometimes from a distance, sometimes closely, through his rise to the head of regional media at Southern Cross Austereo and now as COO at Grant Broadcaster. In that time, we've worked together many times and we've become good mates. So it's an honour to have Rick as the first outside guest on our podcast.
Thanks, Simon.
Welcome,
Rick. Thanks for the intro. And actually, I think from memory, Simon, you also had here at one stage.
How long ago was that, Rick?
And at one stage, I'm the better fisherman, but I did catch your dog in a boat once. So I can remember that.
Yeah, and look, that we can't let that pass without any explanation. That I took Rick fishing, and my dog liked to snap at any fish that came in the boat, and Rick left his bait dangling just beyond the gunnels of the boat, and my dog eventually reached out and snapped it up. So it was. I think it might have been the only thing we caught that day. So
I think but I know there's plenty of beverages on the boat, so we're okay. Oh, look, mate, and it goes both ways too, Simon, that I think I was actually your first victim in a training presentation. So I'm actually really hoping that things have progressed since that time, 29 years ago. But good thing it was a trial and we didn't have to pay for it. That's all I can remember.
That's right, because you got exactly what you paid for. So that was 1993, can you believe? So wow. What do you remember about... I mean, one of the things that struck me about the organisation in those days was the feel, the vibe of coming into that team, and it must have been a great place to work. Tell us about that.
Oh, it was a great place. I'm a Tassie boy, born and bred, even though with a woggy name like Lenarcic. But it's I came from working at Cradle Mountain for 3 years in the wilderness to go down and work for a business that's with the old, I'm trying to think of the name, Southern Cross Tasmania, and a guy called Brian Walker employed me, who I still keep in touch with today. And he gave me really great advice. Coming from the hospitality industry, you work long hours and 7 days a week. And he said, Rick, you've got the communication skills. Just remember that people buy from people they like and trust. And that's been my mantra with that ever since then. Mm-hmm. But it was a great business. Tony Burl was the owner back then, many, many years ago, and have had many CEOs and managers influence my career since those days. I have moved my wife 18 times for this career that I'm currently in. And yes, that's right. Extremely patient, and I would certainly not have my career if I didn't have the support of my wife and kids. And yes. From all around Tasmania to Townsville to Canberra and everything in the middle. It's been a great journey and one that I've enjoyed, but one of the greatest things I enjoy about any senior role is what you can give, and recruiting and inspiring the young ones coming through into their own career path.
Yeah. And look, Rick certainly has got around. One of the things he often asks me when he phones me, because I travel a lot, is where are you? My response is, where are you living? Because while I travel a lot, he relocates a lot. But that's part of the progression through a big organisation and the sacrifice you make.
Absolutely. And my kids have had a great worldly experience, and we now live not too far from Canberra, and they've both nearly finished university and empty nesters now, Simon. So it's been a great transition.
Yes, yeah. And so along that journey, what are the big things you've learned about the way organisations work and what makes them work well?
It's a pretty broad question, and because I've worked for so many different organisations that can be either run by a bank or they can be run by an inexperienced board or a very experienced board, the learnings that you get along the way can vary from how to handle 100 redundancies in a day, or how to generate and cultivate a team, how to build an honest and trusting culture, and how to probably one of the toughest tasks for me was merging two completely different mediums together, which was TV and radio. Bringing a very good radio business together with a very good TV business. And one thing that I learned after that experience was, do not take your time making hard decisions. It's a chapter in that book I've been talking about, Simon, in my life in the media. Of if I had to do it again now, I think we allowed the business to drag on too long together with two separate bodies, instead of making the hard call and having one general manager or one sales manager, or, it was a tough time. And unfortunately, the global financial crisis also hit within a year of the merger of the business. And you do learn a lot of things along the way. But organisations is a broad thing, and certainly from a board level to a family business that I currently work with, that can be miles apart depending on the current economic environment.
And look, I think having been an observer of that process with bringing the two organisations together, one of the challenges is that it almost encouraged two cultures to coexist beside each other instead of merging into one cohesive culture. Is that the way you saw it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was as much my fault as it was the board at the time and the bank, very large bank that owned a larger volume of the shares. It was able for the acquisition to happen. It's everyone brings new ideas. Everyone brings previous experience and the history of how they've done business together when you do merge two businesses like that together. Yes. And at some point, you just need to cut the apron strings, get everyone on board and move forward. I would certainly do it that way.
So what was the hardest thing about merging two cultures?
Obviously the people, because you could have two very good general managers in a market and you only needed one. You could have 12 exceptional salespeople, but you only need 9. Two receptionists down to 1. And, the reason why acquisitions occur mainly is for cost cutting and for amalgamating resources to get a better profit on the bottom line, especially in the corporate world that was happening around around the years 2000s. And I think it would be certainly if we did it now with the experience that I've gained over many years of working for even the same business at SCA. I was there for 26 years, but I had many different names and many different leaders. I would do things certainly very differently now.
Mate, what's as you were merging those two businesses and creating that new organisation, what were the fundamentals that you wanted to achieve in the new culture?
Obviously, the one team, one dream has been repeated many times. To try and have one team that has the same direction, which is very difficult when you merge. And I don't want to talk too much about the negatives, but certainly the positives that came out of it was job security for people that survived, to be able to going from a TV executive or a radio executive or a producer to a media sales executive, to giving more skills and knowledge.
Yes.
That was a really important part of building that business. We gave a lot of people career opportunities and paths by having a bigger organisation that stretched from Darwin to Hobart to Bunbury and WA, and again everything in the middle. Probably one of the hardest things in that when that business got bigger and bigger was the acquisition of Metro, where we introduced Metro Radio into the regional business. And that created another level of complications because it's very easy for people that may sit in a city market that have not really lived in a regional area to make decisions that don't. Just because it happens in Melbourne doesn't necessarily mean it may happen in Mildura, for example.
Yes.
And the sales processes are completely different. The building of relationships is completely different. And more importantly, the trust that you generate in a regional town and you're seen as a community motivator. I often say when I employ a new general manager into a regional market, let's say Mackay, for example, when you employ that person, the language I use is you are actually the second Lord Mayor. People will come to you as important to express your culture and the way you involve yourself with the community because you have so much power working for a media organisation. And I'm very fortunate. I actually have a vessel that I can use to cultivate that across our own culture. I think the family business that I now work for, our catch cry at the moment is we are leaders in local.
Right. And that's very evident on the website that, there's website space dedicated to describing the family values and the commitment to community, which is what you've just spoken about.
And that just goes from community, but also into we're now looking at changing our news structure on how we present local news with newspapers and local voices being lost across the community and these small towns of how we can better serve our community that way. It's very easy to have a local radio announcer or a radio station talking about the song that was just on air, Britney Spears doing something in the US and then talking about the next song. We actually don't want that as a business. We want to talk about what's really happening in that town and what we can do to make that town a better place to live.
Yeah. And look, it fascinates me the contrast between a couple of the major experiences in your career, because when we talk about authenticity in culture, and for us it's about focusing on three outcomes: customer experience, so the community that you're talking about, employee experience, and bottom line results. Just before we move on to the more positive side, you have had times through your career where you've had to prioritise, because that's the focus of the organisation. You've had to prioritise financial results, bottom line results over everything else, sometimes at the expense of people. Tell us about that experience and how it impacts culture.
It's a two-part question. Firstly, when you're in any leadership role and you were told or directed that this is the next steps we need to take to keep the whole business viable, you need to make some really hard choices. And my choice was protecting my own income and protecting my own family values and ensuring that my kids had the lifestyle I wanted them to have, and more importantly, the education to give them a leg up in the world that we live in. So that one day I was told I had to make 100 people redundant within 2 to 3 weeks, and to go through a list of names and to actually highlight who had to go was a very tough part in my career. I did have a very good CIO many years ago teach me how to teach me the redundancy pass, and unfortunately I've had to use that same theory just before JobKeeper was brought out with the COVID situation. But you treat everyone that you're making redundant as if they were your own family, your own son or your own daughter or your mother, uncle, aunt, whatever, and treat them with respect. I often would get a script given to me from someone in the senior HR department saying, here's a 2-page script, read it verbatim. And I knew most of the people that this is the script I've been giving you. I'm showing it to you. I'm not going to read it, but let's just talk about what's about to happen and how I can help you go to the next level.
So make it human.
You've got to make it human as much as you can, because unfortunately I had it on the other foot 2.5-3 years ago, where I was made redundant due to the organisation that I was working for going down a different path. And I'm glad to be on this side of the fence now. And I still have many friends in that business, and luckily I was treated with respect as well. And it's a tough one that you have to absorb. But it's an interesting career. But what do? You go to your wife or your partner and say, I've just been told I'm going to do this. If I don't do it, I'll be unemployed. So you've got to make that choice sometimes. So it's very hard to build culture after you've done that, Simon. It takes time.
Yeah, tell us a bit about that.
Well, you can't just reduce your workforce by 10, 15, 20%, and then just think it's all, let's get back to the office and have some fun and it's all shit and giggles. You can't do that because you've lost that trust from a corporate level. And so much of our relationship building with our staff is based on trust and more importantly, job security. And I'll be honest, when COVID hit, and this was in March last year, and we realised that, if you look at what's happened now after 12 months to what we were told was going to happen, fortunately we still have a very viable business and we've cycled our way through it. But the family business that I've worked for never had to make substantial cuts before with manpower. They even kept staff on during the global financial crisis. And I remember one of the board members saying, look, Rick, you're really good at doing this redundant stuff. You can take charge of that. And I went, well, geez, do I really want to be known as the guy that's used to cutting toes and cutting heads off? Not really. But anyway, I was able to use my experience through a lot of my other team members to guide and lead people on the respectful way to do it and how we looked after staff. And fortunately, the number we had to let people go was minimal, and then JobKeeper come in. And our number one priority for our family business was we want to keep as many full-time people employed for as long as we can.
Yep.
And to the family,
great vision.
To the family members that have run this successful business for many, many years, not getting paid a salary, to senior management taking a substantial pay cut. But fortunately for us, in our regional markets, and the fact that we were giving back to the community, we had clients that couldn't afford to advertise. we still put their ads to air because we know it's a long-term game for us.
Yes.
And luckily that business has come back. And we're
absolutely.
okay. And that's the family values that we hold. We did have to let some people go, but certainly not to any extent that some of our opposition media businesses have done. Because once again, they're okay, but they are determined by some of their metro businesses, which aren't as successful as what we are in regional markets at the moment.
And it's tough as a senior leader that you're seen to do these things, and people can form a perception about that role. But behind the scenes, there's always behind the scenes with every senior leader, there's a human being who struggles with these dynamics, is as human as the next person, and without giving away secrets, I've probably seen you, Rick, when you haven't slept for 2 days because you knew that you had to do some tough things. And I remember you saying to me once that if someone does the wrong thing consistently and doesn't deserve to be with the organisation, it's not that hard. But when someone is a name on a piece of paper and a board tells you 50 people have got to go or 100 people have got to go and no one deserves to, that's the one that kept you awake at night.
I believe as a leader, if you're not losing sleep the night before, you shouldn't be a leader.
Yeah.
Very simple. Because if you can't take the personal, everyone say, "Oh, look, it's not." I hate it when I've read scripts before, but this is not a personal thing that we've picked you. That's bullshit. Because the other person on the other side of the fence, it is personal.
It sure feels personal.
They're thinking, "Oh, can I swear in this podcast, Simon?"
I think you already have, mate. So
they're thinking, "Fuck, how am I going to pay the mortgage? How am I going to keep the school?"
Yeah. Absolutely.
What about the family holiday I had planned? What do I tell my wife or my husband or my kids when I get home? And
absolutely.
Simon, I've told you the story about when I got made redundant, didn't I? When I got home. Can I?
Tell me.
I'll tell you very quickly. I remember I got made redundant in World Square in Sydney. Rang my EA, said cancel all my appointments. I couldn't even tell her because I wanted to tell her face to face. I didn't want to tell her I was being made redundant.
Yeah.
Cancel all my appointments, get me on a flight home. My wife rang me on the way home from the airport saying, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm in the cab coming home." She said, "You've been made redundant, haven't you?" And then I said, "Get the kids together. I want to have a family meet tonight." Got the kids into the dining room. I picked the best bottle of red in the house, which is a dirty old Yellowtail song, because as you know, there's not many bottles of wine in my house.
And it takes some filtering.
And both my boys were very nervous. They thought something was wrong. So we sat down. I said, "Boys, I've got an announcement to make. I was made redundant today." Now, my oldest son turned around at me and said, "Oh, thank Christ for that, Dad. I thought someone died."
Perspective, eh?
It's perspective. And, I really took a lot from that. And we packed up, went for a holiday. We could travel back then and it was great. But there's always another chapter in the book, and I always try and explain that to people, especially really good people that don't deserve to be told to be made redundant, because you do put so much work in trust and building a great culture where people feel safe for things to happen outside of your circle of influence that you can't control. Sometimes you have to make these decisions as a leader, and it makes it very hard. And it's a chapter in the book, mate. That's all you can do and move on and move forward with it as best as you can.
Well, talking about chapters in the book, you've been very generous with your time. Let me just ask you a couple of final questions about the more recent chapters. You're now working for an organisation that clearly values both results, because they run a business, but also the people in the business. There's a focus there is that authentic focus that we talk about producing exceptional results, but creating great experiences for customers and team members. What's that like to work in, and how do you see the interrelationship between the results and the valuing of people?
I was very, very blessed to be given the opportunity to work with Alison Cameron, who's the CEO of Grant Broadcasters, and we get on exceptionally well. We're very similar in our thoughts patterns and where we're heading as a business. I was able to introduce an EAP program very early in the piece, which the family were easy to adapt. You've got to be careful of using the word family a lot too, because You don't want people abusing the family privilege either, if you know what I mean. It's
absolutely.
We still, don't worry, we still make sure people are working, they're getting paid to work, and that's an important thing. But what we try to develop is a positive relationship from director to regional general manager to general manager. We're trying to have open and honest communication. The difference with this business is we don't have a large HR department. We don't have 5 or 6 people sitting in an office giving us direction on how we should be acting or reminding us of, key priorities. We have our training. A lot of our general managers are trained as the HR person in the building because they know their staff better than anyone else. I like the language around unwritten ground rules. I don't know, you've used that language before, Simon, where sometimes it doesn't need to be written down. But around here, this is the way we act.
Yeah.
Around here,
fantastic.
If something happens that you're upset about or you know is wrong, around here you need to tell your supervisor or you need to talk to your fellow co-worker that, you know what, you're really rude to me yesterday. It really upset me. I enjoy working with you, but it's unacceptable that you should talk to me that way. And if it happens again, well, then you've got a logical reason to take it higher. But it's too easy to put something in an email on a piece of paper and it gets sent to a HR, to a department, and then that other person is a victim or is accused before there's ever any reasoning. And really, if the buck stops with the CEO and CEO of this business, we've got 700 odd staff, full-time staff, plus 50 odd or more casuals. If they're not happy with an outcome from a general manager, they come directly to me. But if they feel uncomfortable with a general manager because something's happened, they come to me. And that's the way it should be, because you've got to practice what you preach to your clients on your expectations in these markets. And we have people that live in Darwin, down to Hobart, and through the beautiful Port Lincoln in South Australia. It's great. We are a family business, with the EAP. We've just gone and bought DFIBs for every market because we had a team member who had a scare before Christmas. So we thought, we're going to put a DFIB in every market. So we're always trying to do that, but you can't be in every market. So you expect everyone to treat everyone with respect and trust.
And if you can't be in every market, it's the culture that keeps things strong. It's those ground rules, whether they're unwritten or not. Whether they're explicit or not, I guess, is better than unwritten, because sometimes they're unwritten, sometimes they're talked about. Very rarely are they actually written down. So it's those things that you've mentioned that keep the place strong when you can't be in every market.
And if you're not using the example, Simon, if we have an issue with a senior person in a market, and I've turned to the next level up to, let's say, to a general manager in a market, and I go to an RG to the next level above them, and I say, would you want your daughter or son to work for this person? What you've just heard about what's happening in this market, regardless of how profitable the business is or how much revenue they're on, would you want your own family member to be in this environment? And if the answer is no, then straight away you have a problem. Or if there's even a 30 seconds of delay while they're thinking about it, you're in trouble straight away. And you've got to action that very quickly.
Yes.
You've got to action it very quickly.
Yep.
And what tends to happen in some businesses, it's the cancer can build and you've got to cut it out where you can.
Absolutely. It's the behaviour you walk past is the behaviour you accept, and if you walk past something too often, it becomes prevalent. But I love that. That is a great yardstick of your daughter or son working for that person. So, mate, you've been very generous with your time. If a final word. And I know better than to say just to put it in a single word, because I've never heard you do that before. You've shaped many cultures. You've taken cultures that were not great and made them better. You've taken cultures that were good and made them great. If you were starting out in that voyage today of reshaping a culture, what's the first thing you'd do?
For me, is to get to know the people in the business.
Yeah.
It took me a year to get around every market in regional Australia. And actually one thing that we generated was, and it was a great idea by the CEO, we created what we call an ASIO doc, where we actually had, when I walked into a business, I had a piece of paper with the receptionist's photo, name, and what their hobbies were.
Yeah, right.
So to walk into it, because Simon, you know me better than most. I'm just a normal guy that just does a different job than most. To actually make someone feel important and special by knowing their name and talking about their pet dog in your first meeting, one, they're more relaxed. It's getting to know your people is really important, and that's very hard in a large organisation.
Yes.
That makes it also fun, and you also create that trust and be the first to arrive for a few bevies at that night and be the first to leave. That's always rule number 2, Simon. You know that better than
most. Yeah, you're very good at the disappearing act, I've noticed.
But, I think it's just getting to know your people. And I know a lot of very good CEOs across the country that hold a lot of higher positions than that. Having the integrity and the humility, I suppose, is a really important part.
Great word.
It's to be humble in the people that you work with, and everyone's role is just as important. And 95% of the people work harder than what I do, I can tell you now, Simon. So it's all good to get into those pockets.
I think you underestimate yourself. I don't know if it's possible to work harder than I've seen you work at times, but I've seen you create great success, and it's always been clear that people were very important in producing results, which is why you're the first name that came to mind for this podcast. Mate, thanks very much for your time, and I'll look forward to catching up with you next time I'm in your neck of the woods.
Thanks, Simon, and great, Kieran, also to be part of the podcast. Thank you very much. And
thanks for joining us, Rick.
No, my pleasure. Take care.
Talk with you again soon.
Now, listeners, if our episode topics have left you thinking about your own culture journey and pondering some questions you may have in relation to our podcast discussions, guess what? We've got you covered. We're passionate about providing valuable content to our listeners, so each episode we will dedicate some time to answering questions submitted by you, our listeners. How many questions we get through will vary, as we're committed to keeping our episode to around the 45-minute mark. So jump onto authenticity.com.au/podcast and submit your questions via our SpeakPipe app. We've made it really simple. You just click on the button and record your question. And don't stress, you can remain anonymous if you wish. We look forward to answering your questions soon. Now to this week's Q&A. So Simon, let's have a look at the questions that have come in for this week's Q&A.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. I hope they're as good as last week.
Oh, they're strong again this week. First question is from Adam. Adam is an executive team member at a media network. He says, people get away with doing things in our organisation that aren't consistent with what we claim we represent. And how people are dealt with depends on who they are and how good they are at their job. Is this battle worth having?
Look, this is a really common one, Adam. Great question, thank you. And at the heart of this one is that people are treated differently based on criteria other than performance. And when I say performance, I mean based on criteria other than their performance around the cultural fit. So if someone's good at their job, so for example in media, having done a lot of work in media, we could be talking about an account manager, a sales rep, and an account manager or sales rep who delivers very high sales results sometimes could get away with behaving differently in relation to other team members than someone who just gets average results. What this really comes down to is unaddressed. If this continues, then the workplace culture will be defined by the exception and not by the ideal. Instead of creating the culture that we're striving to create, we're going to end up seeing here that people have no respect, they have no belief that culture is real, because the message that's sent to them really clearly is you're accountable to this culture, but if you sell enough, then you get away with not being accountable to this culture. And we've seen this many, many times. I'm not at all an advocate of terminating people's employment, although I also accept it as a reality at times. Having said that, I have worked with many organisations who have identified a very high performer who's been problematic for the culture and who have taken a strong line with those people. And 90% of the time, those people recognise that, once the line's strongly drawn, I need to change the way I behave. Before, it was simply because no one had ever drawn the line for them. 10 or 15% of the time, I've seen it actually get to the point where that really high performer has lost their job because they have continued to treat people poorly and hide behind their technical performance. In each of those occasions, the overall performance of the team has increased despite the loss of their highest individual performer. And what they find is they're actually stronger because they no longer rely upon one standout performer to deliver such a high percentage of their results. The results are spread more evenly across a team, and a team of people who all feel valued and all feel engaged and all feel good about coming to work because they know that the culture is genuine. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. And I also think that it's important here to, when Adam mentions that it isn't consistent with what we claim we represent, I'd wonder if that's their values. And again, bring back to the point that everybody is responsible for values. Everybody is responsible to behave within the intention of those values. And so there's no certain people that don't have to in an organisation. And that would be my question back to him, would be who's holding them accountable?
And the accountability can be to a values framework, as you've mentioned. And look, we believe very strongly in the values framework, but it could be to some other way that the ideal culture is articulated. But if people are allowed to drift away from that, many years ago, I worked with, and it's funny that Adam is from a media network because this was in a radio station. I won't tell you which city. I won't tell you on air which city, but it was a major radio station and it had a couple of people who would be well-known public figures as announcers. And those people behaved disgracefully with their fellow team members. And no one would hold them accountable because the management felt, we rely upon them so much. What if we hold them accountable and they leave? What if we hold them accountable and they don't like it? What if we hold them accountable and this creates other problems? And I get that. But the problem was every other person in the organisation said, well, I clearly don't matter because these people can treat me how they like and I'm being given no protection. My manager doesn't have my back. And they lost faith in the genuineness of the culture. They said, we say we want something, but we're not really committed to it because we allow these people to get away with it because of who they are.
Absolutely agree 100% with what you're saying. Okay, Simon, well, thanks for today's episode.
It's been great again. I'm enjoying it more and more every time, and I can't wait for episode 3. Thanks for listening to Authenticity, Shaping High-Performance Workplace Culture. If this episode has provided you with strategies, insights, or inspiration, head to your favourite podcasting app and make sure you subscribe to be notified of future episodes. To get a sense of how your current culture measures up, you can take our Authentimeter, a free online assessment. It will take you about 10 minutes and give you an indicator of exactly how authentic your culture is. You can find that at authenticity.com.au/podcast.